All right, good morning, Mr. Marshall. My name is Jake Scott, and I'll just start by establishing what we're doing for the recording. So, we're going to be interviewing several Virginia Tech alumni about their experiences in Vietnam. And it is April 10th, 2024. So, if you could go ahead and just give yourself a quick introduction, um, your name, etc.
Sure. Yeah, I'm John Marshall, class of 70 D Squadron, 27-year fighter pilot in the Air Force.
All right, perfect. So, to start off, if we could explain sort of how after your time at Virginia Tech, how you went to training and sort of that selection process there, getting ready to go into the service.
Sure. I always wanted to be a pilot since I was a little kid. I went to Virginia Tech for the Corps of Cadets and also their Air Force ROTC program uh, because it was very highly rated and well respected. Had a great time in the Corps. Uh, because I changed majors from aeronautical to industrial engineering. But the best thing was I got my private pilot's license through Air Force ROTC and was selected for pilot training. Went to pilot.
All right, I'm gonna back up a little bit before we continue. Um, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what got you into flying, where you're from, all that kind of stuff?
Oh, sure. Uh, Grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., out near Andrews Air Force Base out in southern Maryland. My dad was an FBI agent. Uh, he regretted deeply not being a pilot in World War II. And so we would, every opportunity we got, we'd go see, watch airplanes. I remember it being a little kid going to, picnic after church. Uh, we'd go down to where all the cherry blossoms were and watch the airplanes come in and out of the airport, or we'd go to Bowling Field or Andrews and do the same thing. Just always loved airplanes. A lot of my friends' dads were pilots, uh, and it just fascinated me. And it was something I wanted to try, and I'm glad I did.
All right. So after you were selected to pilot training, coming out of Air Force ROTC at Virginia Tech, what sort of planes were you given the opportunity to look at?
Uh, the way pilot training worked then, you were graded and ranked in your class, and then if you ended up with 25 pilots, they would send out a list of 25 airplanes, and you picked an order. We only got three fighters in my class, uh, fighter aircraft, one to Vietnam. Uh, I was third in my class, so I talked the first and second guys into not going to combat, and then I took that airplane, and they were happy to. They got selections they wanted, so it worked out great for me. And I took an A-37 to Bien Hoa Air Base in Vietnam.
So, taking that into account, you wanted to go, see combat and as a fighter pilot.
Yes, I naively thought at that age that it would probably be my last opportunity for combat, and I was wrong. But uh, that's what I wanted to do. I figured if I was going to be good enough to do that, that I should experience
Would
it.
you say a lot of your classmates wanted that same experience, or was it sort of a mixed bag?
It was a mixed bag. We had four or five guys that got assignments to Vietnam and transports and EC-47s and other and forward air controllers. I got the only fighter aircraft, so it was not that people wanted to avoid it. It was really they were looking at career and opportunity and what
Right.
type airplane
Okay.
they wanted to fly.
So last night you told me your fighter aircraft was the A-37. Is that was there a training aircraft before that?
Yeah, the A-37, they took the T-37 fuselage upgraded and strengthened the wings, added some armor, took the engines out, and put in two T-38 engines without the afterburners. So it was a small airplane that was very much overpowered, and it was great. It was like a sports car. It would turn on a dime. It would go really fast, up to about 400 knots, and then because of the straight wings, it would not go supersonic. But really great airplane for close air support. Had six uh, armament stations under the wing, plus two fuel tanks under the wing and two fuel wingtip tanks. So it had a good range. Uh, it was very nimble. And I think being nimble, because we were doing close air support, uh, most of our ordnance was released from 300 feet to 1,000 feet above the ground, which was unfortunately well within the range of small arms, AAA, machine guns, that kind of thing. But the airplane was so nimble, it really uh, avoided
Right.
a lot of issues
So
that
how
way.
long would you say between finishing your training and receiving your orders to go to Vietnam? How long would you say that time was?
The RTU, the replacement training for the
Okay.
A-37 was 3 months. So I did that. I did. I went to pilot training in September of 71, graduated September 72, went 3 months to England Air Force Base, Louisiana to learn to fly the A-37. We had 8 guys in my class there. 2 were going to Vietnam to the same squadron. Mike Miner, who is a uh, West Point graduate, and myself. The other 6 guys, 2 were going to Panama, which was an active duty A-37 squadron, and the other 4 were going to the Guard and Reserve. After that, it was basically water survival training for a week, uh, survival and POW training in uh, Fairchild Air Force Base, Washington, which is near Spokane, in January, which is not the best time to go out in the mountains and try to escape and evade. There was so much snow that they ended up giving us snowshoes, and it's hard to really run away from anybody in snowshoes, you know. But and then they did 3 days of POW training, which was basically mental and light physical harassment, sleep deprivation, that kind of thing. And then from there, straight to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines for jungle survival training. So basically, I trained in all facets of survival, and then finally got to Vietnam in early February.
Okay, so moving into sort of the Vietnam era, what were kind of your impressions as you were traveling over there and when you first stepped foot on the ground there?
Really long flight from Travis Air Force Base in California to Clark, and then, like I said, jungle survival. Then we, Mike Miner and I, we were back together at that survival school. Uh, Took a C-130 to Cameron Bay, landed there, and said, "We're going to Bien Hoa." And they said, "No, you're not. You're going to Tan Son Nhut in Saigon, because that's where your wing headquarters are." And they said, "Go get on that airplane." So we got on a C-123, a two-engined transport. We got on, and then we were followed on by probably about 20 Vietnamese soldiers and their families and their children who were going to Tan Son Nhut. It was interesting. They were all carrying, it looked like a pet crate, but it was with chickens. So we arrived at Tan Son Nhut with an airplane full of chickens, which was interesting. And got to Tan Son Nhut, got in process there. They said, go spend the night at the officers' quarters, come back tomorrow. We'll figure out if we can get you to Bien Hoa tomorrow or not. So Mike and I checked into the queue, went to the Oak Club to have a much needed beer and some food. And we were happily walking back to the uh, officers' quarters when a staff car with a colonel's flag stopped us and said, "Are you lieutenants, marshal, and minor?" And we went, "Yes, we are." And they said, "The wing commander wants to see you right now." So we hopped in the car. For 2 second lieutenants, you're a little leery of meeting the wing commander when he sends his car for you. Mike and I are looking at each other going like, what did we do wrong? You know, we didn't mean to do it, whatever it was. But we met the wing commander, went in, saluted him, sat down. He came around his desk, really tall, nice guy, older guy, uh, not quite my age now, but he was getting close to retirement. His name was Dave Odell. He was a World War II and Korea veteran and was now the wing commander there. Shook our hands, said, "My call sign is Digger. Uh, we need you to go to Bien Hoa right now because they're short of people and they're very busy." So he said, "Go get in my personal airplane and we will take you to Bien Hoa." And so Mike and I grabbed our gear and thought, boy, this is really great. We're going to arrive in style. His airplane was a World War II C-47 transport, which was unique. There weren't a lot of them left in the world around that time. So we got a ride to Bien Hoa, which is only about 20 minutes, and got met by the squadron there. Basically in briefed, put in assigned to our particular flights, and given our quarters and told to come back the next day and we'll start flying.
So, can you describe sort of the living environment in the quarters and things like that before we get up in the air?
We had two hooches, which were basically two long, narrow buildings. Each one had, each building maybe had 20 bedrooms, two people to a room. There was an area in the middle of each. The one I lived in happened to be the hooch bar. So I was right next to the bar, which was very nice. Uh, the other one had a recreational area in it. We had a platform between the roofs of the two buildings that we called the beach, and people would go sit up there and sunbathe or do whatever, read books, because there wasn't much else to do. Uh, we had a lot of music. We had a lot of liquor. We had a lot of food that would be shipped in. We would do Mexican night once every 2 weeks. We'd have a steak night. The quarters had a grill that had been made out of a 55-gallon drum that we would get Vietnamese charcoal and we would light it with jet fuel. The lighting was always a significant event. Somebody would get picked to do it. They'd take a stick or an ember, get it burning, and run as fast as they could by the charcoal grill and drop the thing in and try to avoid the explosion of flames that came right after it. Nobody was ever hurt badly. But we tried to make it as much as home as we could. There was a good dining hall and a club on base. But really, your life was just going to the squadron, flying and working all day, and then coming back and sleeping and talking to your friends and doing the same thing again and again. Our squadron had a 16-day duty cycle. It was 4 days of what they called frag flying. Basically, frag orders would come down, and it was for this airplane to go meet this forward air controller at this place and time. But that was set. And then you do that for 4 days. Then we do 4 days of alert. Alert, we had 8 airplanes on alert. You had a 5-minute time from the bell going off to taxi and take off. We were, loaded with various kinds of ordnance for whatever they needed. The airplane was prepped and ready to go off, and they announced which flight it was. You would sprint to the airplane, jump in. The A-37 set very low to the ground where you could actually reach into the cockpit before you got in and start an engine. So I would run to the airplane, start one engine, hop in, connect the harnesses, uh, start the other engine, make sure everything was working, and we'd taxi. And it was very, very quick. Straight to the runway, we'd get priority, we'd take off. You could fly on alert, day alert, 3 times a day. I always flew 3 times a day on day alert. Then we would go to 4 days of night alert. You could fly 2 times at night. Okay, and we most always flew 2 times at night. And then you do 4 days of what they call duties, uh, different things you're doing in the squadron, different jobs you have. And you might fly once during that time. And then the 16-day cycle would start again. And it just repeated and repeated and repeated. So,
Sure. So that's sort of the daily routine of being deployed, I guess, in at that time in your squadron. Um, what else? So you talk about like really quick procedures and getting ready and to take off. Was that part of the training, or was that sort of an on the job you learned how to do it a lot quicker?
no, you
Okay.
learned there. We were taught there how to set it up for alert and how to scramble. The daytime stuff was easy. Nighttime out of a dead sleep was sometimes real hard. I remember one sortie that I was leading that I took off at night on a scramble. And once I took off, I kept hearing this banging noise. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I looked around, saw the cockpit on the left side, and my shoulder harness that connects me to the parachute was outside, banging against the airplane. So basically, I couldn't eject, or if I did, it wouldn't have worked. Uh, so I had the opportunity to abort and come back or go fly the mission. It was more embarrassing for me to abort and come back having done that. So I flew the mission, and luckily nothing happened. But yeah, that was really the alert process.
Was it was it the same sort of schedule with going on alert and all these different things the entire time you were there, or did it change as the situation progressed?
No, it was that way the entire time. We had about 36 pilots in the squadron, plus a couple staff guys that flew with us. And again, we were flying. Let me put it this way: when we got there, they were flying a fair amount, and then starting in April, the start of April, they did the North Vietnamese did the big Easter offensive, where they attacked the DMZ, and a week later they attacked our region and overtook the town of An Loc, or surrounded An Loc, overtook Quan Noi. And from that point on, because now you had North Vietnamese divisions, tanks, heavy anti-aircraft, and SA-7 air-to-air missiles, which we had not seen before. It had always been the Viet Cong were primarily small groups, and they would attack and pull back kind of thing. This was a full out, like World War II, tanks running across the ground kind of environment. Plus, we had, again, surface air missiles that they hand carried, shoulder fired, that were shot at us. So it got very intense, and it stayed that way through July. So it was about 3 months of incredibly intense flying every day. That's all you did. And then it eased up a little bit.
Okay.
My squadron actually closed down in September, and the airplanes went to the Vietnamese. That was after the uh, Easter offensive, uh, part of the withdrawal from Vietnam that was going on. When I got there in 72, there really weren't any American ground combat units still there. There were a few special forces guys, but it was mostly air power, whether it was the Army helicopters and their stuff or the Air Force. Uh, During the An Loc, Marines came in. But it was pretty much just the support to the Vietnamese is what we did. There weren't, Marines and ground troops that we were supporting. We were supporting the Vietnamese army. But everything we did, we had to do through forward air controllers uh, or ground controllers. But normally it was a forward air controller fact, and they would direct us to the target and show us where to hit and adjust us, do that kind of thing. Excuse me. One sip of water.
No, totally. So I guess my next question is, eh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure in your job as a pilot that you would have interacted too much with the Vietnamese, but did you have any interactions with them in your job or just in on base with the local population?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a Vietnamese A1 Sky Raider squadron and an F5 squadron uh, that we knew the pilots. A couple of them we became real good friends with. Plus, the Vietnamese maintenance guys were in the hangar right next to our squadron building, and they made the best bacon sandwich I've ever had in my life. Then they would once a week cook bacon sandwiches and sell them. And so we'd talk and visit. But yeah, we went to dinner with a lot of the pilots when Vietnam fell in '75. We'd kept in touch with a bunch of the pilots. Some of them got out, some didn't. One squadron commander, who's a good friend, ended up owning a McDonald's down in Texas. But yeah, we interfaced with them a lot. The forward air controllers interfaced with the Vietnamese ground guys a lot. We also did some work in Cambodia and got to know the Cambodian ground facts. Uh, Never met them, but talked to them all the
So
time,
you
and
mentioned a
really
couple
good
different
people.
locations that you would fly missions to in the forward operating controllers. So what were some? Was it grouped in like, from this chunk of time we were flying here, from this chunk we were flying here, or was it more sporadic?
It was more sporadic, except for the 2.5, 3 month period of the Easter offensive, where 90% of what we did was in Anlock, which was only about 40 miles, 50 miles or so northwest of us and Saigon. Uh, but we did fly some to I Corps and 2 Corps. We were stationed in what was called 3 Corps. And then we did some flying in 4 Corps and some in Cambodia. Occasionally we'd stray close to Laos,
Right.
but
Um,
the U.S. never was in Laos.
so was
But
there a,
yeah, we'd go
I
there.
mean, obviously you have a mission to do, but was there one you preferred to go to?
Yeah, one you didn't get shot at much. The When I first started flying sorties in the day, and you'd hear the fact talk about ground fire, but you couldn't see anything. There were no tracers, so you really didn't. Yeah, okay, I'm getting shot at, but it's not that intense. Then the first night flight I had, getting shot at, and it was amazing. The ground was lit up with people shooting machine guns and rifles and stuff at us. And suddenly I realized all those daytime sorties, they were doing the same thing, and I was just ignorant to the fact they were there. When the Easter offensive happened and the North Vietnamese army came in, they, in addition to SA-7 missiles, they had 23 millimeter and 37 millimeter guns that fired tracers. And I remember one particular day, uh, 11 May, taking off out of Bien Hoa in the morning, going to Anlock. Took off right after sunrise off alert. And again, it was, Anlock was 40, 50 miles away. On the climb out, going through about 3,000 feet, looking to the northwest, the sky was just lit with tracer fires. It looked like a World War II movie, just going everywhere. That was a particularly interesting day. But yeah, that some of the missions seemed very quiet and some were very intense.
Was there ever a mission where where your aircraft was heavily damaged or something happened and you had to go back?
Uh, I had one day that the one of the engines quit, so I had to go back and land. But no, in the squadron, in the pilots, we had two out of the 34, 35 pilots that never took battle damage. I was one of the two. And it was not because of talent. It was not because I could dodge raindrops. It was just luck of the draw. But yeah, it was quite common to have, a few uh, holes in the airplane when you came back. It was not uncommon. We lost 7 months I was there. Three were shot down. Well, no, two were shot down. One crashed trying to land. That was my friend Mike Miner, who did not survive. Uh, One landed and apparently had a damaged landing gear and didn't know it, and he ran off the runway. Uh, and Airplane slid to a stop. He jumped out, and the airplane exploded. He was fine. And then we had one airplane that we got rocketed fairly often. We'd have rocket attacks, 122 millimeter rockets would get shot into the base. And we had one airplane that somehow the rocket made its way through the uh, overhead revetment and hit the airplane and destroyed it. So we lost 5 airplanes. And we lost 3 pilots during that time, all good friends. And we also lost one passenger. The A-37 had 2 seats. We always flew at single seat unless you had an instructor for a check ride or something. But when the Easter offensive was going on, the Marines sent a squadron of A4s from Okinawa to help. And they based out of Bien Hoa for the 3 months. And they had a few of their navigators came with them, but they didn't bring any of their 2-seat airplanes. And their navigators, to get their flight pay, had to fly at least a sortie a month. And one of their navigators went on a sortie with us, and unfortunately took a machine gun round that went through the seat and killed him. Okay, so we lost those 4 people in that time period.
Do you think compared to other squadrons that that was a rather low amount or how do you think?
It depends on the war. In Vietnam, again, it depends on the time in Vietnam. The folks that went over Hanoi during some of the time periods, they'd lose a third of the squadron, not in a day, but over a couple months. It's not like World War II, but it was a fair amount for us. It was unusual. They hadn't lost that many airplanes in the 4 years the squadron had been there,
Right.
just because it was a higher threat level. It was more what was getting shot at you
That makes
was
sense.
more capable, I guess. And again, it wasn't as bad as Desert Storm. We didn't lose anybody in Desert Storm. It was just our squadron didn't. My squadron didn't. So
Okay, so could you kind of give me the time frame of when you were deployed to Vietnam just because we didn't start off with that?
yeah, yeah. I got there. We got there in February of '72, and again in September of '72, they closed the squadron. In that basically 6.5 month period, I had 236 combat sorties. Uh, that I averaged. Let's see. To be a flight lead, you had to have 100 combat sorties. I had that in 3 months. So we were busy. You basically flew and flew and flew and flew. Uh, of the time that I was there, I only left Bien Hoa once, and that was for one night to go to Saigon to have a really good, great dinner at a French restaurant and hotel, and then came back. But other than that, it was just 6 months of work.
So you would have been there from September of 72 to probably mid 73,
Oh,
February
I'm sorry. No, February
February.
February of 72 to
Okay.
September of
Okay.
72.
I just wanted to get that on there. February 72.
Yeah.
All right. So can you talk a little bit about near the end of your tour? So, when you're getting ready to think, okay, I might make it home now, what's going to be what happens
Mm.
next?
Yeah. We were a little surprised that our squadron was shutting down. We only got a couple weeks notice. Uh, basically all the lieutenants were sent home. The captains and above uh, stayed to get their 1 year in. Okay, it was a 1 year tour. Uh, for all the lieutenants, we got credit for it. It didn't matter. And basically, all of us were sent back to be forward air controllers. I went to Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. But the trip home was interesting. Uh, Again, a packed airplane to Travis Air Force Base in California, uh, which was a really long day. We spent a couple hours in Japan, but not that we got to go anywhere. You basically got herded into a gated area and kept there like cattle. Uh, from Travis, that took us on a bus to San Francisco Airport, and I was going to catch a 747 to Dulles, where my family was. Uh, I will never forget walking through the San Francisco airport in my uniform in 1972, and went basically an area where all the hallways connected, big central area, and walking through, and a young lady walked up to me and spit on me and said, baby killer and da 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 da. And I was just sort of shocked, you know, wasn't expecting that. Uh, and that was depressing. But what I also noticed is a lot of the people there would not look at you in uniform. It was the time in the US, the military suddenly wasn't highly thought of, at least in that part of California, which again was depressing. But then I got on the 747 and it was a red eye, took off late at night, flew all night, landed, daytime in Dulles, and it wasn't very full. And after I'd been on the airplane and we took off, the stewardess came up and said, "Are you just back from?" I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Come with me." And we went to the back of the airplane where, there was the last section back there. Nobody was sitting there. She sat me down, and three of the other stewardesses came up, and the whole flight back, they basically poured champagne and talked to me, just had me talk about Vietnam. So it was that kind of, it was interesting. They were very supportive and a lot weren't, you know, sort of like our country today. It was just sort of divided.
Would you say it was that divided before you left, or did that kind of happen while you were gone?
No, that had been happening. That I remember being on the drill field at Tech, and protesters would come and basically yell at the cadets. Just, you got to be kidding me. We're in college, but it was the sign of the times.
So, was there anything during your deployment that you think would be worthy to mention that I didn't ask about, or anything memorable?
Sadly, the most memorable things are when you lost people. Uh, Mike Miner died in March. His airplane crashed while he was trying to land after a combat mission. We assume he had some kind of control issue, and he died. On May 11th, uh, the mission I was talking about, where the sky was lit up when we took off, and when we got there, you could see tanks running around on the ground. There was just airplanes getting shot at all over the place. We watched a Vietnamese A1 get shot down by a surface air missile. And when I first got there on target, the fact said, we can't work you north of town because you just lost an A-37 there. And that was Mike Blassie, who you ought to look up on Google sometime, because his story was interesting. But long story short, with Mike, they got his remains about 2 weeks later. There wasn't much left. He was attacked and shot down by a 23 millimeter anti-aircraft weapon. He was attacking that site. His remains and information got shipped back to the U.S., and somehow the paperwork and the remains got separated. So they had remains. They weren't sure who it was at that point. So they put Mike's remains in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington. Years later, with DNA testing, his sister, who was a colonel in the Air Force, one of the guys that did the searches in Vietnam for, to recover remains, came to her and said, I think Mike is in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And he said, I just, it's a gut feeling. So the family, with a lot of pushback from the military, went to Congress basically and got Mike removed to be tested, the remains to be tested. They did that at like 2 a.m. again, so it would not interrupt the things that go on at the tomb there. And sure enough, it was Mike. And the family said, we'd like him to come home. So they took him back to, I think it was Missouri, and buried him there. But just an interesting story. He was a great guy. But that was the 11 May, really bad day in Anlock. When we worked to target, I had my flight commanders, my wingmen, and we were bombing tanks that were running around on the ground, which was unique. That was something we saw very often, but we destroyed a bunch of tanks. And my wingman got shot at by an SA-7, which was the first one our squadron had seen. It looked basically like just a white plume of smoke coming from the ground and tracking your airplane. The FAC and I were both yelling at him to turn right, hard right, brake right. He did. The missile missed. And that was interesting. And then I remember rolling in on my last pass to expend my ordnance, and I was pulling off. The AAA fire was basically in front and above of my airplane, right where I was going. And I was going, this is not good, But again, like I said, the A-37 was very nimble. I just pulled tracers, slowly dropped below the front of the airplane and missed. They were basically leading me too much. That I was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross for that sortie. To be honest with you, I'd give it all up to get Mike Blassie back. But look that up on Google. It's an interesting story. He's a great guy. And then I had a flight in July with Steve Gravrock on my wing, another Air Force Academy grad, another lieutenant, and a good friend. We were actually bombing some of the NVA units that were still left around Anlock. The siege of Anlock had stopped. They'd finally been able to get in supplies via the ground and replenish the soldiers. For the first 2 months, everything was airdropped. They got all their supplies either helicoptered in or dropped in by the Air Force. but we were attacking a ridge line that had an NVA unit on it with the South Vietnamese down at the base of the ridge out in the ponds and such that were there. Uh, I rolled in, pulled off the target. Steve rolled in, dropped his napalm, came off the target streaming fuel. And the FAC and I again were yelling for him to, get out, get out, get out. And an airplane just slowly rolled over and went in and crashed into the swamp, you know. So I lost Steve there. So those are probably, unfortunately, three of the more memorable flights, just because you lost friends, and that was the longest 15-minute flight back to Bien Hoa because I was by myself. Not squadron commander Don Loosely met me when I landed after I debriefed and talked to the intel guys and gave them what I knew. And Don took me in his office, sat me down, pulled out opened his bottom drawer, pulled out a bottle of whiskey, and we had a toast. And those are probably my most memorable flights, sadly for the wrong reason.
I think that's understandable considering the situation for sure. Um, so I think, while you were there, did you and the other pilots feel like they were communicating to you what your actions were doing towards the overall mission, or did you feel like it was just sort of individual missions?
Uh, we got decent intel feedback, and again, we were real close to the forward air controllers. Most of them were out of a squadron in Tan Son Nhut, so we would talk to them all the time. They'd come up. Again, some of our guys would go down there, so we had a good, friendly relationship. We knew what we as a squadron were doing. It was really hard sometimes to understand what was going on in the rest of the war because the only real data we got was through the armed forces radio, occasional newspapers, you know. But we had a good feel for what was going on in our part of the war, not
Right.
so much the rest. Just that's where you're sitting.
Were people satisfied with that, or was there a desire to be a part of a bigger picture?
No, I think we were very satisfied. The squadron was very tight, very close. We were proud of what we were doing and how we were doing it. Uh, you know, you sort of block out the negativity of the rest of the world. You can't. You've got to concentrate on what you're doing and do your mission right, and uh, you know, get the job done.
Do you think it would have been more difficult if you had had access to sort of the online like news that we've got now, and seeing the outside perspective while you were there?
Yeah, social media, and I'm not necessarily a big fan of social media. Because again, you can get very slanted inputs. Uh, but that it was Vietnam toward the end was a negative war in the unfortunately in a lot of the conflicts we've been in, we don't go in to win the conflict. We go in to help somebody, but we back off and not do what needs to be done to end it. Uh, uh, Much like in Desert Storm. Desert Storm compared to Vietnam, uh, I was an F-16 squadron commander. Uh, we did not get daily guidance from the Pentagon or the White House, uh, unfortunately, like they did in Vietnam. Uh, and when the 6-week war started in Desert Storm, we were basically allowed to do our job, and we devastated the Iraqi military. Unfortunately, uh, that one stopped about a week too early and allowed a lot of Saddam Hussein's uh, best units to escape Kuwait. And that dragged that war on for years and years after that. And again, that was a lot of social commentary that and bad press at home showing, again, if you want to look up, but the highway of death, as they talked about out of Kuwait into Iraq, that was just lined with vehicles that had been shot up and blown up and destroyed. I had no sympathy for those people because they were Iraqis, military trying to escape. Okay, but the media portrayed it a little differently, and so that war, that combat phase, ended a week or two before it should have, and in turn dragged on, caused Saddam Hussein to stay in power for a long time, longer than he would have.
Right.
Okay, in my opinion. But yeah, I think it's harder today with instant social media. It's got to be harder on the military. Uh, just because again, you're getting so many things from so many different directions and so many different thoughts and
Right.
inputs. Where when you're there, you want to concentrate on the mission and what it takes to
Mr.
get
Marshall,
that
I wonder
done.
if I could ask a follow up question. This is Jason. I'm
Sure.
really captivated by your story, and thank you for sharing about the losses of your friends while in Vietnam. I can only imagine how difficult that must have
Mm-hmm.
been for you and the other men. I'm curious because at this time, by 1972, American troops were withdrawing. You mentioned Vietnamization. The Nixon administration was negotiating for peace. And I'm just curious how the men on the ground who were left to continue carrying out these missions while most of the American forces had pulled out of Vietnam. Did you talk with others about that? Was there the sense of just surviving until the end? Could you talk a little bit more about how you guys talked with one another about that?
Really, we were more mission focused. Yeah, we'd sit in the bar at night or, whenever you weren't flying and talk about what was going on in the world. But uh, our best way home was to do our mission and do it successfully. Okay. And try to protect each other. And you really, the military teaches you to, you know, take care of the mission, do the mission, take care of your people. And that's what we focused on. We did get, again, a lot of rocket attacks and those kind of things. We luckily did not lose any people. I thought I was going to get lost during one of those. Uh, this may not be something you want to post, but we had once a month we would have a rap fest, which was basically a going away party for the guys rotating out and a welcome party for the new guys. And we were well lubricated when that was over. And I remember going to sleep and we had a rocket attack that they actually fired over 122 millimeter rockets into the base. I was awakened from a dead sleep. I was not feeling that well. I grabbed my flak jacket and helmet and ran to the bunker, which was right outside the hooch. I didn't make it to the bunker because I had to throw up, basically. And I remember sitting there with my head in the toilet and my friends running out laughing. And I was thinking to myself, at least if I get blown up, my head will be encased and my head will be fine. Okay. And then luckily, nothing landed within more than 100 meters of us. And we were not, we didn't lose anybody. But that's
It sounds
a
like
good
a
memory.
it sounds like a really stressful environment. What you're describing: 270 combat missions in 7 months, rocket attacks while on base. So it's how did you deal with that stress in that environment?
Uh, Most fighter pilots, you have to compartmentalize those kind of things, and hope to come back to a squadron of people that had the same uh, situations, and you could talk about it and over a drink or over a dice game or over music or whatever was going on. And really, the people around you helped you get through any issues you had like that.
Thank you.
Did anything that you learned while you were a student or a cadet at Virginia Tech help you get through that initial deployment?
Yeah, I think pretty much the discipline side of it. Again, tech was a military environment. It very much prepared you and focused you on missions and doing what you need to do. So yeah, from that standpoint, I think it was a great personal choice for me to come there, and I wouldn't change a thing.
All right. You talked a little bit about your experiences in Desert Storm after Vietnam. How would you say that your experiences in Vietnam, directly or indirectly, sort of shaped how you led in Desert Storm as an experienced soldier at that point, airman?
Again, in Desert Storm, I was an F-16 squadron commander of an International Guard unit. We were the first Air Guard unit called up and selected to go to Desert Storm, to lovely Al-Kar, Saudi Arabia, which I would never put on my list of places I want to go again. Again, just a desert. But and we lived in tents. But again, with Vietnam, it was camaraderie in the squadron that you relied on, and it was the same thing we did in our squadron in F-16s. We had two of us had combat experience. Mine and one of my other officers was a forward air controller, an OV-10 pilot in Vietnam. And so we spent a lot of time talking to the squadron before the first mission about combat and, what to expect, those kind of things. Our first mission was a 20 ship of RF-16s. We took 24 airplanes. We launched 20 on the first day altogether, and we were going to attack surface air missile sites in Kuwait, SA-2 and SA-3 sites. 10 sites, 20 airplanes, so 2 airplanes to a site. Launched, got there. We started picking up other things that we were being tracked. We split into our 10-2 ships. We rolled in and started dropping bombs. And again, the sky lit up with surface air missiles, SA-2s, SA-3s. I remember I was on the westernmost target and coming off target, looking back to the east, and all I saw were surface air missile contrails. And we had one pilot, young lieutenant, Knothead, who in the middle of all this, in a very high-pitched voice, started yelling, "Knothead's hit, Knothead's hit." We're all looking for him. And then about 15 seconds later, a deeper voice comes back and said, "Knothead's okay. It was just an afterburner blowout." So he has never lived that down. But great pilot. But it was nice. We came out. We went in with 20 airplanes. We came out with 20 airplanes. They had told us, the intel folks said, to expect a 30% loss rate, which would have been, 6 of my airplanes. But we lost none. But the camaraderie and the trust in each other, I think, makes a big difference. And that's really what those kind of squadrons are about, or any unit that has a mission. It's got to be a trust issue. And that, your friends are looking out for you.
I imagine that's an important part of every sort of mission-focused deployment or anything. Right.
In particular in the military and in combat.
So to sort of tie things back together, was there anything that we didn't talk about in between there, or something that you feel is important to your story and what you learned in Vietnam?
No, not really. Just every day is a new mission, and it was a new adventure, and you just had to really concentrate on what you were doing and protect your wingman, and he protected you, and that's in anything you're doing in the military. I think that's important.
So my final sort of question here is, if you have one or a couple things that you want yourself and those who didn't come back home to be remembered for their service in Vietnam, what would that be? What would that legacy be that you would like to be remembered for?
Just that we did what our country sent us there to do, and we did it extremely well. Uh, I still get together. We periodically get together with some of the forward air controllers and the pilots that are still left, which sadly is an ever diminishing amount. But the camaraderie is still there, and the friendships are still there. And I think friends for life, and stay in touch with them, and mourn them when they're gone. But I think that's really it. That was the thing that's most important to me, is the friendships.
Well, I really appreciate. Sorry, I heard myself in the thing. I really appreciate you for sharing everything with us today, especially the stories of losing friends and overseas and everything like that, dealing with that afterwards. That was really important for us to listen to. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and yeah, thank you.
Mr. Marshall, before you go,
Yeah.
I wonder, well, first off, I want to thank you again for giving this opportunity to Cadet Scott and for me for sharing your story with us. But I have a couple of more follow-up questions if you have time. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So we talked a little bit about this moment of Vietnamization and interactions with Vietnamese. Were you involved in any of the training of Vietnamese airmen during that time?
No, they actually trained in the States, bases in Florida and elsewhere, but they would come here for
Oh,
training.
okay.
So no, I was not personally involved, but just had a lot of friendships with them.
What
Not in their
what were
training.
your impressions of their capabilities?
Oh, they were very capable. The Air Force side of the Vietnamese Air Force was very capable. I can't speak to the
Sure.
Army side.
Part of this project is about commemorating the end of the Vietnam War and recognizing the fall of Saigon. It will be 50 years after the fall next summer, next April. Where were you whenever you learned about the fall of Saigon?
I was actually just getting to England Air Force Base in Louisiana. I was trained in an A7 airplane, A7D, and I was just getting there. We had probably 5 or 6 guys from our squad were there at the time, so I remember talking to them about that,
How did you feel on?
hoping that the Vietnamese we knew got out okay.
Right. To follow up on that, you talked about you knew Cambodians or you spoke with Cambodians over the radio, I'm presuming. Did you follow news about the refugee crisis or the Cambodian genocide during or afterwards?
Yes, and again, that was incredibly sad because we had some folks that we talked to on the ground every time we flew that you got to know fairly well, and never met them, but knew their voices, and had a lot of good conversations with them.
Thank you for sharing that. And you talked a lot about your friends, and thank you for sharing their part of their stories. Have you ever been to the Vietnam War Memorial?
Yes, I have several.
Can you talk
times.
about that first time?
And,
What was it like visiting the wall?
It was very sobering because it brings back the memories. You go find their name and the date, and again, it's sobering to look at a wall with 50-some thousand names on it. That a lot of folks, but The biggest thing, it just brings back memories.
And because you were on an air base, I'm curious if you were exposed to Agent Orange.
Uh, yeah, actually, Bien Hoa was one of the bases that for years and years, or for a couple years, they flew C-123 ranch hands, which were the airplanes that dispensed Agent Orange. And one of the guys in the squadron was on his second tour. His first tour was as a C-123 pilot. And he would talk about that and how the fact that the Agent Orange chemicals were in 55-gallon drums and they'd slosh around and spill. And, when they came back, the Air Force basically would dump them into the drainage ditches, whatever was left over. And that's affected a lot of us. I'm on an Agent Orange disability, as are a lot of Vietnam veterans. But that was one of the things at the time, they really didn't know what the effects were going to be long term.
Have you ever joined any Vietnam veterans organizations such as the Vietnam Veterans of America?
Oh yeah, I'm a member of Chapter 303 of the VVA and the American Legion and the VFW.
Okay. Have you been an active member, and have you helped in those efforts to get Congress to provide disability compensation to veterans with Agent Orange affected health problems such as yourself? Or
Yeah, but to the extent I wasn't an officer in those organizations, we supported them, and we would write to our
okay.
congressman. And so I've done that.
I'm really amazed by, as a historian of the Vietnam War, how much of the current support that veterans have today really stems from the Vietnam War generation. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because so many of them were not particularly well welcomed home, that really stuck, and that's something they've tried to change. I will say, and I told a group at the VVA the other day, the big difference for me between Vietnam and Desert Storm was the homecoming. We came home and everybody was applauding, crowds were there, people wanted to talk to you, they wanted to get you on the news because it was viewed as a proper and, if you will, uh, and successful time versus Vietnam. And it was also different because in Vietnam you trickled home. You'd go for a year and then you'd come home. Where we went as a whole unit, and the whole unit came home at the same time from Desert Storm. So different, but much nicer
Sure.
homecoming.
And similar in many ways to the experiences of Afghanistan War veterans.
Absolutely. That's the same kind of long involved conflict that I personally don't think we should be in. If you're going to do it, you do it, and do it to the best of your ability and get it
I
over
think
with.
General Powell would agree with that, with the Powell Doctrine.
Yes, he would, and he was outstanding to work for.
If you had advice for Afghanistan War veterans today who, even though the war ended just a few years ago, what advice would you give them about moving on from the experience of war and having life beyond military?
Actually, the VA is actually doing VA gets a lot of bad press, but they're doing a great job with the psychological side of PTSD. And the biggest thing is to find a group of friends, a group of veterans, like the Vietnam Veterans or American Legion or one of those. Join it, and it's a place to talk to people. I think the worst thing about PTSD is that you try to take care of it by yourself. Find people with a like background and share with them.
I'm curious because you seem to be able to talk about your friends openly. How long did it take for you to talk about the Vietnam War after you came home?
Not too long. again, the friend Mike Miner, the first friend that I lost, I'd been in the A-37 RTU with him. He was newly married. His wife was 3 months pregnant when we left. And she had her baby after Mike died. When I got back from Vietnam, I made a point to go visit her and just talk to her and tell her, the things Mike and I did. And I got to hold his son. And that was very important to me. And I think it helped her too. But I think the biggest thing is just being able to find somebody to talk to.
That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for sharing your story with this project and for your service to your community and to your nation. I really deeply appreciate it and admire it.
Good. And Jake, go Hokies. And and good luck in your career.